In this lesson, we will learn that even the most awesome of projects can have things going wrong behind the scenes when they are not organized properly. Okay, so I'm opening up the After Effects project file 03_begin, and I've gone ahead and just set up a RAM preview here so that you could see what was going on in this composition. And it's a pretty big composition. There's quite a few layers. There's a lot of things going on here. And at the surface level, whenever I'm just looking at this, there doesn't really seem to be anything wrong in the project as far as the way that it looks. But if I take a look at my timeline and my project panel, you're going to notice that there are some problems. So there's a few things here in the timeline that have been named descriptively. So we see that some of those files that were brought in were named descriptively, and then all the things that have been pre-composed have names, but really a lot of the other things don't have names yet. So these boxes here, I don't really know what they are, and even though this says blue box, or this one says reddish box, these other boxes over here, I'm not sure which ones those are until I just start clicking on things. So you should be able to look at your timeline and look at the names that you have in the timeline and know what layer you're clicking on, instead of having to click lots of different things to figure that out. Then if I come over here to the project panel, this is a complete mess. The comps are mixed in with all of the graphics. Then we have this random solids folder. Then we have some Photoshop files. It's just all jumbled together. So if you're doing this project by yourself, and you're just kind of creating this off the cuff, just adding different things, it's really easy to not stay organized in this process. And sometimes it might not bother you that much. But what if you need to go back and change something? It's always going to take you longer to sort through a project that hasn't been organized than if you knew exactly where everything was and exactly what everything was named. Then the next step is maybe you're working somewhere and you're going to be sharing this project with somebody else. So you create this, then somebody else has to maybe go in and do some revisions. If your file looks like this, it's going to be a huge headache for someone else to come in there who doesn't understand all of your own personal little naming conventions, and they're just going to be completely lost. So if you're working with other people, it's really kind of inconsiderate for you to have a project panel and timeline that are named in such a way that is so disorganized. So let's go through and get our project panel organized, and then maybe talk about some ways that we can rename layers on our timeline so that they're more descriptive, and maybe even pre-composing a few of these layers together so that it's a little bit easier to figure out with just one or two clicks what layers are which. So starting up here in the project panel, I usually like to organize my files based on compositions, graphics, and footage. Now, this particular project doesn't have any footage, so we would just do compositions and graphics. Now, if I had a whole lot of Illustrator files and a whole lot of Photoshop files, I might even break it down one layer further, where inside of my graphics folder, I add subfolders for those Illustrator files and Photoshop files. But we only have a few, so we'll just make one graphics folder. I'm going to come over here just down to the bottom of that project panel where there isn't anything, and we'll click New Folder. I'm just right-clicking to bring that panel up. And then let's go ahead and come in here, and we'll call this Graphics. And then I'm just going to select by holding Control and clicking all of those files individually, and then we'll drag them into the graphics folder. And already this looks much better. Now, sometimes I'll even make two separate files for different types of compositions. So I'll have a folder that says Compositions, and then inside of that I might even add more subdivisions just based on what kinds of compositions they are. So if maybe I have several compositions that I move throughout that are all main top level compositions, I might put those in a folder that said main comps, and then another folder for nested comps. So this looks like we only have one main composition, since that says main at the beginning, and then everything else is a nested comp. So in that case, I would just leave everything in one compositions folder. That's not too much to sort through. So once we twirl those up, our project panel looks much better, a lot easier to organize, a lot easier to find things. If I'm looking for a composition, I know exactly where to go. And just having that main composition named main composition is a huge help whenever you're working with other people. Sometimes I might even go in there, rename my main composition just to have a character, maybe like an asterisk at the very beginning, and that'll pop it up to the top of the list. So that just gives it a little more separation from all of these other types or names of compositions that don't have any kind of separation. They're just really alphabetical at this point. So that's one way for you to be able to find your main comp. Just pop it up there to the top that way. Now, let's talk about our timeline a little bit. Right now, it's pretty all over the place. I'm not really even sure if these are in the right stacking order. Lots of things kind of going on here. So let's just break this down a little bit. That has been done already to make this more organized is that at least kind of looks like files have been grouped together. So all of these lens flares that are PSDs there have been grouped together in such a way that it seems that I can tell kind of, you know, these are all together. Those are probably the only instances of those files. There's not going to be just one of these random ones maybe up there, but it could be. I'm not sure. Looks like we actually do have one there on layer 7. And I have no idea why that's in a different place than the other. So you'd have to just kind of go through and figure that out. So it looks like this lens flare there that I clicked, that's going to be number 6. I'm just going to turn off that eyeball so you can see the difference of what that looks like with and without that. Looks like that's kind of creating this light that you see coming through the middle of those circles. So that might be why that's in a different place. Then let's go ahead and I'm going to just turn off one of these. That looks like that's turning off a lens flare that's kind of off over here to the side. I'm just going to come back down. So this one right here. So maybe all of those lens flares that have been grouped together are the ones that are on the edges of all of these boxes and panels. So that may be why those have been grouped together in that way. So once you kind of figure out how things have been grouped together, it looks like that one is there at the top of that group. You can begin to pre-compose these so that they're a little bit easier to navigate. So I'll go ahead and select all of those, and then I can bring up my pre-comp menu just by hitting Control-Shift-C, and we could call this edge flares. So that might be a little bit more descriptive than just lens flare, because we have several lens flares going on in this comp. So I'll go ahead and say OK to that. Now that's going to cause a little bit of a problem right here at the beginning, because you'll notice that now everything looks like these lens flares have lost their blending modes and they're no longer in 3D space. So all I have to do is come in here and check my collapse transformation switch on, and that's going to put everything back in place. So already you can see that that was probably one of the largest lists of layers that was all grouped together. Now those have been put into this pre-comped layer and nested inside of there. A lot easier, makes our project panel look just, or our timeline look a lot more organized. Now, one of the problems with doing it in this way is that if I come inside here, I can't really tell anymore exactly how these lens flares line up with my boxes. So I'm going to probably have a little bit of trouble figuring out, you know, what if I needed to move this one over? I'm going to have to come back out here to my main composition, see, oh, this is how far I moved that. I don't want that to be off of the side. I want that to be right there on that edge. So I'd have to come back in here. So this is a step I usually would do maybe right at the very end when I know I'm not going to have to move a lot of things around and I just want to organize some things. I know I'm not going to be editing that much more. So another thing that you can do to stay a little more organized is to just name things a little bit better. So I have all these different lights here on my timeline. And it looks like this light is the one that I have selected here, kind of off over to the right. And then there's another light here, more to the left in the middle. So let's see what the different types are. I'm just going to toggle down this light 1 and look at the light options. This is a point light. And this other light is a spotlight. So right there, just knowing those different light types and maybe naming those accordingly is going to help you quite a lot. So we could rename this middle spot. So this light right here, I'm going to right click, go all the way down to the bottom to rename. We'll call this middle spot. And then this light right underneath that we'll rename and call this left or right point. So just that little bit of extra. We don't need to have light in the name because it has this little light icon out to the left. So that's just kind of visually represented for us there. That's going to make this just navigating which light this is a lot easier. And another way that you can stay more organized is by changing the colors of things. So all of my pre-composed layers are defaulting to that sand color, and maybe I want to come in here and change that up a little bit. Maybe I always want to recognize that this layer here that has this sand color is going to be different because it's this box that's over here to the right. So I can just come in here and click this little tag, and that's going to give me a whole list of different colors that I can choose. Now you want to be careful that you don't choose a color that you already kind of have established in your mind as representing something else. So let's say, for instance, I just chose red. Now that's going to kind of make me think that maybe I'm referring to a solid or a text layer. Those are always going to be red like this. So that's not something that I want to confuse myself with. I'm going to come back over here and we'll change it to a less frequently used color, maybe like this seafoam right there. So by choosing that, that's going to give me just a little bit more of a variation in the colors on my timeline, and I'll be able to differentiate between those a little bit better. Now, if someone else was using this, they might not know that seafoam always meant that it was referring to these types of boxes. So you want to just be as specific as you can in your naming conventions, as well as changing those colors when you know other people are going to be working on your files. And definitely keeping your project panel organized is going to be helpful to you and to anybody else that will ever have to dig into your file. So in this lesson, we learned that not staying organized can get pretty confusing in a big project, and it really doesn't take that long to organize a project, but it can cause you and other people who use your files hours of headache when you didn't stay organized in the first place.